We have with us today Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, Director General Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, and former Ambassador of India to Japan, the Republic of Marshall Islands, and Mexico. His presentation is titled China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Taking Stock. Chairing the session today is Mr. Jaydev Ranade, President, Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and former Additional Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India. Before I invite the chair to begin the proceedings, let me explain a few ground rules. During the presentation by the speaker, all participants except the speaker will be muted. For the Q&A session, participants are requested to use the raise hand option available at the bottom of the participants list in the Zoom meeting platform. It is also available in the mode drop-down menu option. Questions can also be sent to the chair through the chat option. The chair will call upon the participants to ask their questions. The concerned participant will unmute himself or herself. Other participants, meanwhile, are requested to keep themselves muted until the chair or moderator calls them upon. I would now like to invite the chair to begin the proceedings and offer his opening remarks. Over to you, Mr. Ranade.
Thank you, Dr. Ijana. And like everyone else, I'm sure who are eagerly waiting to see what Sujan has to tell us about the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So am I. Sujan Chinoy, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, really needs no introduction to this audience. He's, apart from having been ambassador to Japan and Mexico, he has kept alive his interest in China and things Chinese, I dare say, over the years. And his language fluency has also is also very high. So in his new capacity, new avatar, as the Director General of the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, Manohar Parrikar Institute, he has, I'm sure, started following issues relating to China, Pakistan, and others even more closely. And I think since he is selected the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as his topic for the day, it underscores the importance of this initiative taken by the Chinese. It's something that has unsettled geopolitics in this region, and its extension, namely the Belt and Road Initiative, is unsettling the geopolitics even in as far as Central Asia, Europe, etc. So a lot is happening, initiated by the Chinese, and in this immediate region for us, I think things are changing and new challenges are being thrown up to a large extent by the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So I won't say anything more. We'll wait to hear Ambassador Chinoy, who I'm sure has got much more information, and then we can flesh out what he says maybe a little more through the question and answer. So over to you, Sujan, and we're all looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So can you hear me now, and can you also see the screen? I'm screen sharing right now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Jaydev, for your very kind words. It's always good to listen to people who say good things about you, and you are one who has consistently been kind to me. You've indulged me over the years, so I'm grateful for that. Look, it's very difficult to speak before a learned audience such Chinese studies, and I must begin by actually thanking Ambassador Ashok Khan for not only inviting me to speak, but also for, shall I say, foisting the topic on me. No, Jaydev, I didn't select the topic. It was Ambassador Ashok Khan's choice. And I think I made the mistake of writing an occasional paper on the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So I didn't know what I was bargaining for at that stage. But let me make a game effort this afternoon and show you a few slides. And hopefully that will set the ball rolling. Now, as the chair, Mr. Jaidev Ranade, has just explained, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is an extremely important project, which is extraordinarily important to both China and to Pakistan. And I shall structure my presentation in this manner, with the background, the political and strategic motivation on the part of the two countries, the management of the projects, which is essentially in the hands of the army, the environmental impact and corruption, and as such, what is not talked about much in official Pakistani circles is the opposition in Pakistan that comes from within that country, and set this against Pakistan's mounting debt and regional implications, and finally our position. I may ramble through some of this, but you will be forgiving at all times. That is my request. Now, China, as you all know, has established several types of partnerships with many countries around the world. And in recent years, we've seen how China has tried to seize the narrative as well, in terms of its position in the world. It's emerging in a much more sort of frontal manner, taking on frontally all competition. And it's also, over the years, strengthened its partnerships, albeit among countries that essentially have a certain kind of dependency on China. Those that are not truly dependent on China are not necessarily those that want to come so close to China. But those that are economically weak do not have access to a certain kind of financing, especially from Western institutions or the Bretton Woods institutions, perforce end up in the Chinese embrace. Pakistan is, of course, in a different category. There are strategic reasons why it has engaged China over the years, especially since the late 1950s. After having flirted with both CENTO, CIETO, after having even proposed an anti-China kind of partnership with India during Ayub's time. And of course, Pakistan does need China's money for its economic development. For China, of course, Pakistan is one of its closest allies, if I can use that term in a slightly looser fashion, an all-weather strategic partner, which is termed as the 全天候战略合作伙伴关系. So this type of a relationship, where Pakistan is often referred to as 巴铁, is like an iron, friend, where their partnership is deeper than the oceans and higher than the mountains. The CPEC could actually serve as a model for both countries, especially for China. If it's successful, on it rides, in fact, a lot that is being attempted under the broader rubric of the Belt and Road Initiative. So Pakistan has seen one of the key fulcrums, and this project simply cannot be allowed to fail as far as China is concerned. I'm giving this very confusing slide to you, and I'm absolutely confident that you cannot really read all that is there because it's very tiny, the font. But I just want to put this before you, that look at the sheer number of projects that are covered by the CPEC. In this one slide, I've actually tried to put in everything that I could find that relates remotely to the CPEC. That's why it's so dense. And I'm hoping to show you slightly, more sectional slides on the same thing, all the way from the Punjab Pass down to Karachi, Gwadar, all the way towards Peshawar, Havelian, etc. You can see that there are many road, railway, and other energy, transport, and other projects there. Now, this is a slightly more sort of focused part of that same slide, the northern part. And again, you can see the density with which the development in Pakistan on every score is associated with the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So there's hardly anything that's not within the purview. Now, this is not true just of Pakistan, because when you look at the Belt and Road, you found that within China also, a very large number of provinces and even partner countries kind of had projects that existed, but they were all put in the same basket as the BRI, because the BRI had political backing and everybody wanted to be part of that head table. So I think in some ways, everything that happens in Pakistan today, they look at the possibility of giving it that strategic apex level salience, preferably through the CPEC under that rubric, and especially because there is easy financing available from Pakistan. This is the lower end of that slide. And you can see that the strategic corridor, the CPEC, goes all the way down to the Arabian Sea. And as it gets into Balochistan, of course, it enters territory where there's been considerable opposition to this particular CPEC project. Here you can see the kind of at the micro level, the kind of projects that are associated with the CPEC, especially along the Makran coast in the hinterland as well from Gwadar. I'll come into the granular details later, but I'm talking to a very learned audience. All of you know all this. I'm simply repeating some of the obvious points. Here again, you can see in this slide the broad overview of how close this whole thing is to Afghanistan. Of course, it's close to India, but our views are well known on the CPEC. But I want to pose this little thought for you, that as Afghanistan looks in the future to developing its economy in the aftermath of the US withdrawal, which is of course most unlikely in my view, as in the US is not going to reduce any further for the immediate future. But nevertheless, Afghanistan could be tempted in the future to latch on to some of this, and we'll have to be wary at all times of the implications. The aim, of course, of this project is to connect Gwadar port to Xinjiang, to ensure that there is connectivity directly with the Xinjiang province and from there to the rest of China. Within China, of course, the infrastructure has greatly improved over the years. And so there is road, rail connectivity to virtually every part of that geography, not the least because it's the same part of China that connects to Kazakhstan and to other countries in Central Asia, to Eurasia, onwards to Europe under the rubric of the BRI. Highways, railways, pipelines, gas, oil, to overcome the Malacca conundrum, dilemma that China faces. All of this is part of this particular project. The total length of this particular highway itself is around 3,000 kilometers. This is a slide which I have just borrowed from one of the touristic sites to show you the historical connect that comes across the Khunjerab Pass to Hunza. Now, Hunza is full of potent historical meaning, not just to India and Pakistan, for Hunza is part of POK and essentially it's Indian territory, but also because the Chinese have had these very spurious, specious claims over Hunza without any basis in the past. In fact, it was Hunza that had territorial claims onto the other side. This road, originally the Karakoram Highway, which comes in through the Khunjerab Pass, many of our learned colleagues who research such matters would be aware that it was originally proposed to pass through the Mintaka Pass. And later, at a certain stage, the Chinese had veered it towards the Khunjerab Pass. So this is another point that intrigues me to know why exactly, apart from reasons to do with the features of the terrain, why did the Chinese want to veer away from the old Silk Road, technically, which passed through the Mintaka Pass? China's global ambitions are well known, and there's global competition which is unlikely to wane, notwithstanding the Biden administration's potential ability to engage China more, to dialogue more. But some of the key issues are hardly likely to vanish. I think the fundamental position that the US has on the BRI, which is the larger umbrella under which the CPEC is being carried out, that is also unlikely to change. Former officials like Alice Wells, etc., they have, of course, pronounced themselves in no uncertain terms. So we look at the global ambitions in order to situate the CPEC in the local context, and we can see the the astronomical enormity of the Silk Road economic belt and the maritime Silk Road. I mean, they traverse the length and breadth of this part of the world, all the way, as you can see in the slide to the right, to Rotterdam. And trains have been moving now along the railroads created there, all the way from Yiwu in Zhejiang province to Rotterdam. On the left, you can see some of the key projects under the BRI, of which, of course, the CPEC is one. And I want to actually make the suggestion here that because of the go-slow that's been seen in the BCIM, and because of what is happening in Myanmar today with regard to the China-Myanmar economic corridor, there is every likelihood that the Chinese will focus even more on the CPEC, because the Americans have been threatening sanctions against Myanmar. And I think at this stage, the Chinese will be a little cautious and will not want to push the envelope hard in Myanmar if it means going a little slow with regard to their economic activity. They might prefer to do that rather than to present themselves as a frontal target for being put into the crosshairs of the US sanctions. But I see that as actually allowing greater focus on CPEC. This again shows you briefly the proposed rail and road corridors spanning the globe. And I did speak about this, the BCIM being dropped from the BRI and the CMEC being uncertain. So CPEC will acquire greater salience. That's just a proposition. Now, this flagship project is, of course, being carried out under Xi Jinping's signature foreign policy initiative with which you are familiar, the grand strategy of the Belt and Road. There are, of course, several projects under the CPEC, but they mainly relate to energy and infrastructure. From the Chinese point of view, they would generally tell us that, look, Pakistan's economy is really bad. They need to, be helped. If only we can help Pakistan develop its economy, and development will bring prosperity, and Pakistan will have fewer problems, possibly also, amend its, change its behavioral patterns. But this is, of course, a real, sort of a hard sell to justify a kind of relationship that's been put in place assiduously over decades. CPEC received a boost during Xi's visit to Pakistan. The 1+4 structure essentially is a Gwadar port plus energy, transport infrastructure, and industrial cooperation. So there are 4 key spokes there. There are 3 stages from 2014 to 2020, then 20 to 25, and then 25 to 30. So 21 to 25 is the second phase, which will focus on some of these issues that you see in the slide before you, including blue economy. And when they cooperate on the blue economy, in my view, it will take China, once again towards the Arabian Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Persian Gulf, etc. So blue economy is a way of China sort of sallying forth even more in the Western Indian Ocean. I think I would keep that in mind. Phase 3 will have, agriculture, education, clean energy, healthcare, and this is something that they're working on under a joint working group that's been planning ahead. It's kind of perspective planning. The political and strategic motivations are also very clear. It's a geostrategic project, the CPEC. It's not a purely economic project. Pakistan has been reduced to, if I can be, sort of churlish enough to use this term, a quasi-colony. And it provides an exploitative strategic perch in South Asia and the Arabian Sea to our northern neighbor. CPEC is also a tool, in my view, to draw Pakistan into an even closer embrace amidst, a general sort of parting of ways or drifting of positions between the US and Pakistan. And today, I think more and more people would agree that it's very difficult to imagine how Pakistan can survive without China's help, because, I mean, you've seen inflation recently in Pakistan is 11%. Growth has reduced in 2019 to 1.9%, as against 5.8 in 2018. Pakistan's debt is $280 billion, of which 30% is external borrowing. And when we look at external borrowings, there will be a large chunk that also comes from China. So that, I think, makes it very difficult for Pakistan to survive without China. And in a sense, it's the linchpin of China's South Asia policy. This increasing dependence on China will enable Beijing to exercise greater influence and control over Pakistan as well. Of course, the CPEC's trade and connectivity is also expected to bring some benefits to China in terms of development of its western relatively backward western region. Xinjiang itself is an area in some turmoil. And for China, it's crucial to cooperate with Pakistan in order to curb militancy. Even before the CPEC was created, there were these incidents, if you recall, where the Arabic translations, versions of the Quran were being smuggled into Xinjiang, and China has always viewed this with great apprehension in regard to the separatism that prevails in the Xinjiang Uyghur region. So seeking Pakistan's cooperation to meet the challenge of Islamic jihadi networks is important for China, not just in Xinjiang, but also in the Fatah areas where Uyghurs separatists end up occasionally as part of the foreign contingent that is hosted there. Gwadar, as you know, is again a key sort of fulcrum in China's maritime strategy. And now, from my point of view, it has the potential to be used as a Chinese naval base in the future. These are all incremental arrangements that creep in once you have a toehold. It's a matter of detailing thereafter. And this puts the PLA potentially in the vicinity of strategic geography, such as the Strait of Hormuz. It may allow China to enhance its naval cooperation with others. And for instance, we have seen some snippets of this. At the end of 2019, we saw that the Chinese had a joint exercise with the Russians and the Iranians there in the Hormuz region, the Strait of Hormuz. They had another exercise with South Africa and Russia in the Western Indian Ocean. So it could be a matter of time before naval assets start visiting more frequently, start doing more regular OTR, berthing, and one thing leads to another. That could be a challenge for us in the future. The Gilgit-Baltistan part of it is also important. Now, I believe that GB is again a very strategic part of Pakistan's geography. CPEC passes through GB. It's very close at that point to the Siachen Glacier and the subsector north in Ladakh. And in the GB area, there have been reports, experts would know better, of a construction core, of the Chinese side also, being in that area. Now, my point here is, again, that, look, in the event of extreme turmoil in Pakistan, China, with a kind of positioning there in the GB area, can strengthen its grip over that region, especially Hunza. So it may appear far-fetched, but to me, it's not so far-fetched. If something dramatic were to, impact on Pakistan's own internal cohesion and geography. Pre-March 1963 agreement, that China used to kind of claim the princely state of Hunza as a tributary based on a lot of fiction, but that is how narratives were created then. So we need to look at that too. Now, what do I mention here? The digital part of the CPEC is something very important and must be studied further. There is a new upgraded fiber optic cable network spanning across Pakistan and connecting to China, which is being developed at a huge cost. It comes from the Tajik Tashqorgan autonomous county in Xinjiang, which is in the Tashqorgan ranges, all the way to Pakistan. Now, on the one hand, you have Gwadar and Karachi as landing points for internet traffic. That's like the current situation. Excuse me. The digital fiber optic cable across Kunjarab is the major alternative to any kind of disruption to the standard, landing points and undersea cables. It will cover Pakistan in terms of terrestrial digital TV as well, 90% of Pakistan's population. To my mind, that will also make the Pakistani population even more kind of exposed to Chinese thinking, ideology, and many other things. So this is a rough sort of sketch of the digital CPEC route, its length and its scope in general. The political and strategic motivations, now from the Pakistani point of view, they want to obviously transform Pakistan's economy and link it to what is the world's second largest economy today. There are special economic zones to be established. Pakistan has a huge energy crisis, shortage of electricity, power outages on a daily basis. And so energy and power are one of the key, is a key aspect of the CPEC. I've given some details here, but I don't wish to read out everything there. To my mind, these energy transportation systems, the whole linkage, because there is a fair bit of linkage under CASA 1000 between Central Asia and Afghanistan, and Pakistan can also develop its own sort of energy corridors, cooperative corridors, not only with China, but potentially with all others in the region, the Central Asian countries, the CARs, if I might use the term, Mongolia, Russia, and that needs to be kept in mind. Balochistan, again, it is seen as a very important part of the CPEC's geography. From Pakistan's point of view, the success of the CPEC can be a game changer for Balochistan. It can kind of put a lid on the insurgency and separatism in that province, generate employment, etc. But then most people also feel that this is not working to the advantage of the local people. Elsewhere in the slides, you'll see that I have coined a new term, that in Balochistan, it's not seen as a China-Pakistan economic corridor. It's seen as a Chini-Punjabi economic corridor. It's, of course, CPEC, but it leaves out everybody else. From the security angle, Gwadar is something that can provide Pakistan with an alternative base vis-a-vis Karachi. You're all aware that Karachi has been hit by the Indian Navy in the past also. If you recall, in 1971, we had the killer, squadron of Osa-class Russian missile boats that had been very ably used to kind of literally set on fire the oil tanks and many other parts of the infrastructure at Karachi in 1971. Gwadar is a little further up and provides for a little more breathing room there. And I think that is part of this. Now, Iran is also something that plays a role here, because the CPEC can help Pakistan if it succeeds. Pakistan emerges as a key player in bringing China and Iran closer together. Iran, especially at a time when it is being, sort of cornered in a sense by sanctions. And so therefore, there is a natural affinity there for them to come together. Elsewhere, I've also pointed out that though commercially competitors, Chabahar and Gwadar call themselves like sister ports, and commercial rivalry apart, there is scope there for cooperation. People have been talking about it. Imran Khan, of course, has been doing a volte-face. I mean, earlier, before becoming Prime Minister, he questioned the CPEC. He spoke about its inherent commercial bias favoring Chinese companies. But after becoming the Prime Minister, he's singing a different tune. And he seems conflicted also at the best of times on how to pronounce himself on the CPEC. But at the Belt and Road Forum, for instance, the last one, he, of course, spoke out in favor. In 2020, he has spoken about the CPEC as being a gateway to prosperity, representing strong bonds. So this is, of course, to be expected from him as Prime Minister. Now, this should tell you more about how the CPEC is not really managed professionally as an economic project, though it's being touted as an economic project. It's directly under the control of the army. Army is completely in charge there, and the army chief has also given an assurance that they will do what it takes to ensure that the CPEC succeeds. They will do what it takes to ensure its security. A special division, as you are aware, a special security division of about 9,000 soldiers and 6,000 paramilitaries has been established to provide security for the CPEC and, more importantly, to Chinese workers who are often at the receiving end, especially when you get to the Baloch end, but not necessarily only in Balochistan. The CPEC authority has been in the news recently, if you have been looking at this particular subject. Earlier, it was a presidential ordinance, which was established, which was passed in 2019. It sidelined the Planning Commission and it put General Asim Bajwa as chairman. Now, he, as you know, is a senior 3-star from the Pakistan Army who was also in charge of the Southern Command there. And at that time, as an army officer also, he has dealt with Balochistan and is reckoned to be somebody who has experience with projects in Balochistan. This authority lapsed in 2020 after an interim 120-day extension. Thereafter, it was introduced a couple of times in the parliament and there was a ruckus, there was opposition. And finally, it was passed in February, the CPEC Authority Bill, despite opposition from the PML, Nawaz and the PPP, etc. So we need to keep this role of the army in mind. As far as update is concerned, construction is in full swing in many parts of the CPEC. 1/3 of announced projects have been completed, and 9 out of 17 energy projects have been completed. 8 energy projects are under construction, and above all, the Gwadar district economic zone, it's like the jewel in the crown there. It's also being developed. China is investing heavily in connectivity, not just of a physical kind, but also 4G use of sort of 4G to enhance its own presence there. This is a little overview of the port. You would have seen it umpteen times on Google. Now, this one, as you know, is on a grand scale, the Gwadar port. It's a flagship part of the CPEC. Millions of dollars will be poured in, not only into the port, but also into the hinterland to create gated communities and developmental zones to cater to locals, expatriates, Chinese professionals. They'll pour in. And the city is going to host something like 500,000 professionals by 2023. Now, 91% of the generated revenue would go to China for 40 years and only a small part of that to Pakistan on a BOT model. So essentially, I would say that the terms that the Chinese have extracted from the Pakistanis are nothing short of usurious. The tax breaks and all that, not very professional. It's again, I think, done on strategic grounds. Again, this gives you a rough idea of the scale at which Gwadar is being developed, including an airport. There's a bit of discomfort there between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia when it comes to the oil refinery in Gwadar for some reason, which may have more to do with, again, that drift between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia in recent years. But the Pakistanis are not very happy with the Saudis coming in with that refinery project, and they feel that their companies will lose out on business and they will have less control. They probably think that if the Saudis are there, the Americans will have greater control. The Chinese may have not been very comfortable. So again, something that we should analyze. Sandak mine, only giving you an example of yet another important project. Again, this is something that is very important part of CPEC in Balochistan. And it's got a lot of infrastructure coming up around it. There are other aspects, as you can see, upgradation of existing mainline one. There's a railway project from Peshawar to Karachi. There's a dry port near Havelian. Now, Havelian, as you know, is like a stone's throw from Abbottabad. It's like, I think, 20 kilometers as the crow flies. And Abbottabad, as you know, is the place where Osama bin Laden, lay low for a fairly long period with obviously active official, connivance or complicity. Upgradation of the Walton Academy. This is a railway academy at Lahore. But there's so much happening there under this project. Gives you an idea of what is happening. The environmental impact is something that needs to be seen. Land acquisition in the Sahiwal coal project was controversial. People were forced to sell their agricultural land. Those that didn't had all kinds of charges slapped onto them, terrorism charges and whatnot. And there are health issues, more importantly, that have been surfacing at Sahiwal, contamination of the groundwater, drinking water, all kinds of issues there. The impact on Pakistan's culture, as in its heritage, civilizational heritage, can be seen in the example of the Jaimur Bhasha Dam. As you can see, many ancient rock carvings and inscriptions and all that will forever be submerged. The environmental impact also is part of the problem. The bigger problem is widespread corruption. Now, cost of electricity that will be produced is very high. Government buys it at a very high rate from the CPEC projects. Now, setup cost for Sahiwal, as for many other projects, is 26% of the total cost of the plant. Setup costs are generally associated with the, feasibility trials, the machines being adapted to the local terrain, the training part, etc. I mean, before a single ounce of power is generated or coal is removed from any mine, there are certain costs that go into this kind of feasibility, and that's very, very high. And that's, I think, associated with some kind of sponging off that is being done through CPEC projects by many Chinese companies. Excess setup cost is one thing, the interest deductions being allowed. So that's a little skullduggery in terms of the ledger books for Chinese companies at the cost of the Pakistani exchequer or the taxpayer. There are many accusations, too numerous for me to go into, but the CPEC Authority Bill importantly gives total immunity to Chairman General Bajwa and his staff from all legal proceedings, as in the National Accountability Bureau or the Federal Investigative Agency or even the local police. They have absolutely no sway when it comes to the army and its management of the CPEC projects. Opposition is mounting. The narratives are coming out from all sides. Recently, there was an interesting article in the Atlantic by two foreign authors, and they say the debt trap concerns are a myth. But this will not go very far in terms of assuaging the concerns of those in Pakistan who are genuinely concerned about this actually being like an albatross around their neck in the long run. So others have called it in criticizing the CPEC. Locally, it's been called another East India company in the offing. And of course, Hussein Haqqani writes from Washington that it seems that China is not in Pakistan to help its people, but rather as a predatory economic actor. These are well-known themes that have been discussed lately. The Baluch, as I said, see themselves as a minority, not as key stakeholders in what is happening there, and it's feeding into the insurgency there. Local officials, high officials also are very skeptical about the benefits that will accrue locally to Balochistan from such gargantuan projects there. Negotiations regarding CPEC are a taboo. It's not very easy to get this done. And people have tried to reopen some of these deals, etc., when they feel that Pakistani companies have been disadvantaged, or that they're paying more than they should, or that they're borrowing money at usurious rates, or that the terms being given to the Chinese companies are too generous. They raise their voice. There are debates in Pakistan, but not much cognizance is being taken. There is a 9-member committee that was set up in 2018 to reevaluate CPEC, but it's not gone very far, the kind of opposition that comes from the Pakistani army. A conflict with the local population, physical conflict also, apart from the insurgency, is also to be seen. And there's a potential here to rattle Beijing, because the physical safety and security of its workers is also involved. There are clashes between the Pakistan police and engineers from China. In one instance in Balochistan, I mean, they wanted to leave their camp without a police escort, and they were denied permission. So there was an altercation, and they went about snapping the electricity to the local police precinct located within the camp. And that led to physical clashes. There are allegations of Chinese traffickers operating in Pakistan along all these nodes, sham marriages, prostitution, trafficking. But this is again not new, because we've seen some of this in terms of the Lal Masjid incident some years ago. Pakistani paramilitary people have also been killed by Baloch insurgents and freedom fighters, as they are called locally as well. 3 gunmen quite recently had stormed the Xavier Pearl Continental Hotel in Gwadar, and now, of course, the military has used heavy-handed tactics to crush the opposition. There is talk of setting up more units of the Special Security Division in the aftermath of the attack on the Xavier Pearl Continental Hotel. Mounting debt of Pakistan, is something that is alarming. And the FDI debt to equity ratio is very high. And Chinese companies are still guaranteed a certain, return on their investments, which is on their, investments there, which is quite high, as you can see. So this is again something that puts the burden, there's a cross that Pakistan bears for participating in these projects. Regional implications, briefly, if I may run through this. Now, extending the CPEC to Afghanistan, I mentioned early on, is a possibility that, we need to study, as it's been bandied about. It's been raised by China as well. And the Chinese have also proposed an economic corridor with Nepal called the Trans-Himalayan Multidimensional Connectivity Network. The other part, which I hinted at earlier, is the increasing salience of Iran in all this. Now, China's, as you know, executed a 25-year-long kind of deal, which has been reported in the press, worth $400 billion, with potential investments in port development and in Iran's oil and gas industry, transportation, infrastructure. So it's only a matter of time, in my view, before some of what China does in Iran and some of what China does in Pakistan kind of get interconnected. So new arteries for that kind of blood supply will develop around that geography. And we need to study this a little more. At a broader level, China could also be looking at Russia, which has exercised with China and Iran in that same space. China could be looking at bringing in more of Turkey. Turkey does have considerable sway in Pakistan. It's historical. and Iran is next door. So we need to look out on that. India's position on the CPEC, essentially, look, I mean, I think the fulcrum of our position on the BRI is the position that we have on the CPEC, because we see that as directly impinging on our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that despite, the agreement between China and Pakistan of the 2nd of March 1963, which resulted in the so-called settlement of their boundary, despite that provision in Article 6 of Clause 6 of that agreement that this is a very temporary agreement, and that China would reopen negotiations with whichever country is in charge of their geography in the future after the settlement of the problem between India and Pakistan. Despite all that, Pakistan has chosen to invite China into that space, and China has readily waded into that space. So I think that is not acceptable from our point of view. And we have also been looking at how to dissuade foreign companies operating in POK. Even friends like Japan have been told in the past not to unilaterally carry out projects in one space if they were not doing the same on the other side. So we can take a hard look at that too. Late Sushma Swaraj had said that we support a one China policy, but we also expect China to have a one India policy. Now, if there were genuinely that kind of an understanding on the part of China, then really they should have consulted India, as Dr. Jaishankar has put it, in executing such a mammoth project that runs through disputed territory. And that they have not done. So I think that's at the core of our position on the CPEC, and by sort of proxy, it stretches to the BRI. But I have another question to raise on the BRI. Look, India is engaging very, very assiduously, diligently on trying to create its own connectivity projects in the region. And so sooner or later, our projects in the region are bound to intersect with existing or potential BRI projects in those very same geographical spaces. And it is impossible to put that burden onto the host country, since we are going in to build cooperation and friendship and also. So I think we need to study this a little further as to what exactly will India do when it is expanding in the region, and its connectivity projects physically come across roads or sections of roads or bridges or tunnels or whatever it is that actually are ongoing BRI projects. And some kind of intersection will develop there. I think it has also surfaced in the context of the trilateral highway to Thailand through Myanmar. Thank you very much. I think I used a little more than the time that was given to me, but for that, I hope to be forgiven. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Sujan. That was a very interesting presentation, which is why I didn't sort of raise my hand or knock the table to tell you that the time is up. We were all listening to it. Unfortunately, you had time constraints, but you did manage to touch on a number of aspects, and I'm glad particularly that though in fleeting, but you did touch on the social aspect, and I think that is something that bears watching, because most of these projects are in Pakistan's hinterland, which is where the more orthodox and conservative part of Pakistan's population resides. And you can imagine the tensions that would come up, whether reported or otherwise, when you have in your midst people who don't follow or don't subscribe to any of the tenets that they live by. In other words, the Chinese, of course, as we know, are very fond of their pork, their alcohol, etc. How that goes down, we'll have to wait and see. It'll happen over time, but I'm sure certain things will start simmering and then later on catch up. You touched on the debt. I think that is a huge problem. And you are quite right when you spoke about the manner in which everything was structured. Because the Chinese companies who are participating in these projects, and the majority are being done by Chinese companies, at least the bigger ones, they all have, even if they're subletting to others, or even if the companies are claimed to be private, the Pakistan government underwrites their loans and the credits. So in any case, the loans are guaranteed by the Pakistan government, loans given by China. So that adds to their burden. The second is the high, this energy sector. It's quite peculiar the way it's developed. Apparently, the supply and distribution channels are in poor shape. Therefore, they cannot take the load. There is adequate energy being generated, more than Pakistan's, more than is offloaded or taken out by Pakistani consumers. But that's because of a combination of factors. One, of course, is the illegal tapping of the lines, but more importantly, poor distribution and supply, and the high cost of energy per unit. So I believe these are factors that are coming in, and Pakistan has already got a $22 billion debt just on energy, which they are now trying to persuade the Chinese to try and reschedule payment, etc. So you are quite right in saying that there is this problem, and obviously there must have been adequate pressures on the Pakistan government, which is why they began going slow on some projects. But I think there the Chinese and the Pak army have a very close coordination. And as you rightly pointed out, the CPEC authority now takes control of it, with the result that the army is now directly in charge, and there's no outside interference. You spoke also about Afghanistan and how you anticipated that in future, Pakistan will be drawn in to this CPEC by the Chinese. You're quite right. In fact, in 2015, shortly after they had announced it, the Chinese also sort of proposed that the Ainak mines need to be connected. And they said they will loop the railway proposed to come from Punjab right down to Gwadar through Afghanistan, through the Ainak and Kabul and out, thereby giving Afghanistan its first link outside and to the sea up to Gwadar. So that is something that you're quite right that it could come up. If it does, it will tie Afghanistan much closer to the Chinese. And that's something certainly that we would need to watch out for. The military dimension is another that I think had you had more time, we would have heard more from you on that. But in that, I think that military component is very strong in this CPEC. And a couple of just quick points. One is, of course, the manner in which the fiber optic cable was initially sought to be laid, only from Kashgar, which is the South Xinjiang military headquarters, down to Rawalpindi, bypassing Islamabad. And then later on, of course, they're now linking Islamabad and going down to Karachi and Gwadar. But Gwadar is interesting. That has always been, I think, the apple of the eye as far as the Chinese are concerned. They've invested a lot in it. When they had friction with the Pakistanis, they gave a few grants for some of the projects. And the submarine cable, as you rightly pointed out, now takes off from Gwadar and will link with Djibouti, with Kenya, with Egypt, onwards to Toulouse or wherever. So that is going to be critical. I think the way this maritime space is developing, the Chinese military literature already refers to Gwadar as a logistics base and Karachi as a naval base. So I don't know what finally Gwadar will become, but that is how they're describing it already. We already see the cooperation in the naval field, and that points to what you were saying. So I think these are very important factors, and I think the impact on India is there to stay. apart from the fact that, we have also tried to finesse them to some extent by revoking Article 370, etc. But the fact is that since the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was announced by Xi Jinping in Islamabad, since then the Chinese have been telling us at every level, including the highest, to ease tensions with Pakistan, to resume talks with Pakistan, to resolve the Kashmir issue, and then look to improving ties with China. So this mantra has continued, and I think it makes it very clear as to the importance that Pakistan and the CPEC have for the Chinese, because the areas covered by the CPEC obviously is Indian territory, which we have reasserted our claims over repeatedly. So I must say that this has been a very interesting presentation. You covered a lot of ground, and you tried to cover a lot of points which you just couldn't because of the time. But I hope Ashok sort of manages to inveigle you in for a more detailed presentation on certain other aspects later. If you're willing, could we open to some questions right now? I find that there are a couple of participants who raised their hands. One is Ms. Ravinder Kaur. So may I request her to pose her question first?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ravinder Kaur, and I'm at the University of Copenhagen. And I am currently working on trade relations between Asia and Africa. So obviously, thank you very much for this very detailed and informative presentation. What I would like to hear a little bit more about is that given that entire discourse about debt and distress, which is obvious in many of these policies, why do countries like Pakistan continue to, adopt these kind of strategies? And here, of course, it is not just Pakistan. Of course, you spoke about CPEC, but similar kind of policies are being implemented, like Sri Lanka or Bangladesh or Nepal or many countries in Africa are confronted with this kind of dilemma. So if I could just push you into that, why do you think, what is in it for Pakistan that it is ready to become the base for China? I mean, we can guess, but I just want to push you on this.
Look, thank you. That's a very interesting question, but we also have very good experts here with us today. And I'm just wondering, in order to make this a little more interactive, and particularly since I spoke at length and exceeded my time, with the permission of the chair, we should invite someone of the stature of Ambassador Vijay Nambiar to say something as to why Pakistan does what it does. He having, done both Beijing as well as Islamabad. So would chair permit that? Because it will make it a little more interactive, and we will all benefit from Ambassador Nambiar's observations.
Surely. Before I request Vijay to come in, let me just make two quick points, to, as you said, add a bit of spice to the discussion. The first is that the Pakistanis are short of funds, and the Chinese have sort of tempted them with huge amounts, huge dollars. But this brings to mind a comment made by a Chinese analyst, in fact, a senior person who often goes to brief the Politburo. And he looks at Pakistan and Afghanistan. And what he told me shortly before the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was announced, and I asked him, it was in the evening, I remember, somewhere in Singapore or somewhere, and I asked him, I said, what are you people doing with Pakistan? You seem to be getting very close. You seem to be getting into some kind of agreements. So he said, let me be frank with you. He said, earlier, we were purchasing the Pakistanis. He said, now we are going to buy Pakistan. So I'm just mentioning that as a bit of spice thrown in, but also the Chinese mentality when they're dealing with Pakistan. It's been different from how they've dealt with Sri Lanka, or they're going to deal with the others, where problems have already started because of debt. So over to you, sir, Mr. Nambiar, Ambassador Nambiar.
Thank you. Have I been unmuted? Yes, okay. No, I don't. I'm not quite in a position. I'm not really the extent of expertise which Sujan has. But having served in some of these places, let me just hazard some of the a few sort of comments to address the question which the lady from Copenhagen has suggested. Now, it is true that both in Pakistan as well as in other countries like Sri Lanka and perhaps even Myanmar, even Bangladesh has been suggested, they are aware of the implications of a high degree of indebtedness to China. But the question is the lure of big infrastructural projects in a situation where they are actually struggling for a better infrastructure is in a sense logical and in a sense unassailable. Most countries who want to build would be attracted at the possibility of a high level of investment, and that is probably the main reason why initially at least they have been attracted to this. Now clearly Sri Lanka has learned a lot from the experience of Hambantota. Now the Pakistanis, I think in a sense are far ahead, not just in terms of their experience with China, but their ability to leverage has been far ahead of all the others. They've always been borrowing beyond their any capacity to repay. They've always been living on high risk kind of things, whether it was during the Afghan war when they were sort of accepting all kinds of financing and using all kinds of leverages. Now they have felt that the political the political, let's say, spin-off or the political advantage of high risk kind of dependence on China far outweighs the kind of economic. They've always felt that they will be able to manage one way or the other, and I think that has led to this kind of sense. And I think they use this primarily for the political and strategic advantages they will bring. Bangladesh, on the other hand, has been much more careful and has been, while it has taken a lot of interest in big projects between China and Bangladesh. It has always been very careful, and there have been a lot of public comments, public writings about the risks that they will face from an excessive kind of exposure to Chinese debt and to debt from China. And they have been very, very careful not to look at, and same thing with Myanmar. Myanmar has also been extremely suspicious of the dangers of an overextended kind of exposure to Chinese debts. And that, in fact, accounts for a sharp kind of, for the continued kind of, let's say, skepticism with which the Myanmar government has viewed. The Bangladesh government has also as led to, in a sense, respond to many of these projects. Now, therefore, my basic point, therefore, is that the CPEC, in many respects, even though it is the fulcrum of the BRI, it is in many respects quite different from many other projects where the political strategic kind of aspect far outweighs the economic sort of aspect. And therefore, despite all the kind of economic problems that they will have, despite all the problems they may have, even in terms of the local populations and the responses, and the problems that they will have as between the economic elites and the families, feudal families, which want to leverage the rent-seeking aspects of the CPEC, and the army, which in fact now has sought greater and greater control. As you know, at one stage, even Nawaz Sharif had probably thought that he could use the CPEC as a means, in a sense, to strengthen civilian authority as against. That was totally unrealistic, and they knew it, and I suppose the Chinese also knew it, and they just they unveiled, as it were, the civilian authorities in Pakistan to accept this to an extent where now it is a very tight relationship, a very cozy relationship with the armies on both sides, basically. And they're also, in most cases, I would think that it is not the economic actors, even in Pakistan, even in China, which will have the major say in CPEC-related projects, but the army on both sides. And therefore, I think that the CPEC, in many ways, is very different. And this, in some ways, also, I had noticed that a person like Siegfried Wolff, who's written on the CPEC, had suggested almost as a as an obiter dictum that as long as relations between Pakistan and India and its neighbors, as it were, continues to be difficult, it will be very difficult for the CPEC will be unable to create the maximum benefit, produce significant contribution for regional cooperation. Now, I think that is not going to happen. And even the Chinese argument that, we should be able to use, you could use this CPEC as a means to leverage better relationship with Pakistan and India. I think that this is really the cart before the horse. And it's not really, I don't think that the Pakistanis have any interest. In fact, the army, the kind of vested interest that the army is building on the CPEC is actually predicated on a kind of more distancing with India rather than the other way around. And I don't see that kind of thing happen in any way to move. And to some extent, I think that will, one would have thought that economic development in Pakistan would help the growth of a middle class. And then that would all then further play a ground in sort of, in a sense, making the system more civilized. The CPEC is not contributing to that. So I don't know how to
add a little bit to what Ambassador Nambiar has so very elegantly elaborated on. You see, basically there are 4 ways of developing yourself. Either you make the money yourself and spend it on infrastructure and connectivity to build your economy further. That is how the Americans carried out their infrastructure programs through the particularly the post-war years. Or you go in for what you call financing that is sourced from atonement, as in, for instance, the Marshall Plan for a devastated country like Germany, or the Asian equivalent, which was carried out for Japan's sort of resurgence. The third way of developing yourself is to go to the obvious place, which is international financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. And now there you obviously, as a developing country, run the risk of reconciling your vulnerabilities, such as there may be, with a Western notion of good governance, anti-corruption norms, etc., the transparency part. So therefore, there remains a 4th way to do it, which is to go to a source which has the kind of money that is available in the first 2 options, and also a source that does not ask these questions about transparency, good governance, human rights, no questions asked. And that source remains China. Now let's split this further. China is sitting on large reserves today. It has plenty of money to throw around. And there are 2 ways to secure China-associated funding. One is to go in for the more structured, more transparent source, which is for instance, the AIIB, etc., where India is also a co-partner. We are a stakeholder. We are a founding member, as we are, for instance, in the case of the New Development Bank, etc. So there are a number of, by the way, AIIB funded projects which are being executed in India as well. But that is kosher. There is the other side of it, the shadow side of the moon, so to say, which is really finance that comes from Chinese banks. Now here's where the rub lies, because it is here that the kinds of likes of Pakistan and these African countries that badly need development, or island nations, etc., all get their easy money from. But it comes at a very heavy cost. As you know, it creates a certain kind of dependency, and people have suffered as a result. So I tried to put it in context here. Thank you.
Yeah, it also seems to be, well, not a double-edged sword, but they seem to be willingly going into it, like Sri Lanka with the Colombo Port Development Project, where again there is unease that they may have to seed that for a number of years, and there's already talk in Pakistan about Gwadar. But I have 2 others who have raised questions here, so I request them to give us state their questions, and then probably Sujan, you can handle both together. We are running out of time. One is General Rajiv Narayan. I think he had a question to ask, and Arfina Hussain, Madam Arfina Hussain. So could you both sort of raise your questions one after the other, and then we'll request Ambassador Chinoy to respond. General Narayan, Rajiv?
I think he's not there, so you might move to, I can see Suresh and Yogendra both there. So
yeah, but have they? Oh yeah, they have Yogendra, and I don't see Suresh here, but fine. So let's hear Yogendra first.
Thank you. I have just one or two quick points about this. One is that in the case of Gwadar, some of the Pakistani expert, there's one Professor Riaz Punjabi, who's actually a former World Bank ex-economist, and he said there are a lot of hidden costs there. One, of course, is that it is extreme water scarcity there, and therefore a lot of water has been brought that has to be done at the cost of the Pakistani government. Then the local services have to be provided by the cost of the Pakistani government, and of course then they have to waive the local taxes. So what actually he said is that the actual cost of the Gwadar, whatever the development is meant to be, is actually far higher than what's been talked about. That's the first point. The second thing is that the Dawn actually had leaked out a document, which is quite some time back, where actually the Chinese investors, which are mainly PSUs, they had a lot of doubts as to whether these projects where they were asked to invest and to build, that those projects actually are unviable. So the point is that the PSUs themselves being under very heavy debt themselves, for them to actually take on unviable projects in Pakistan actually was a major issue. So my point actually is, given the fact that the entire conception of this kind of infrastructure being talked about is actually economically unviable from every point of view, I'm quite sure that in terms of a strategic potential role, that actually has certain constraints. So I'm wondering to what extent the entire conception can really be realized, given the fact that there are constraints both on the part of the Pakistanis as well as the part of the Chinese. That's one point. The second thing is that the Pakistan is developing a naval port called Jiwani, which is further away. So actually, in one way, although Gwadar actually is supposed logistics hub, and they don't want to make it formally a Pakistan naval base, they're developing it elsewhere. So that's the other side. The third point actually is that there is a conflict between Iran and Pakistan because of the fact that they both accuse each other of harboring the terrorists on both sides. And recently, as we know, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard actually made a claim that their forces had gone into Pakistan territory to capture some of the fugitives. And a similar claim is being also made by the Pakistanis. So I'm wondering that in this particular context, the whole idea, the way in which this whole, as I said, in a geostrategic sense, I mean, what really is true potential? Thank you.
So I will give a very short answer to this, observations that you have made. Firstly, I think, as I pointed out, and as the chair pointed out, as Ambassador Nambiar pointed out, this CPEC is not an economic project. It's not based on a careful study of its feasibility or viability. It's a strategic project. And given that it's a strategic project, I think China would take the CPEC in Pakistan as seriously as it would take a similar project on similar scale within its own territory. So whether it succeeds or fails, to my mind, is not linked to its economic aspects. China would be willing to do what it takes to ensure that the infrastructure comes up, even if it is not necessarily economically feasible. Would it allow a project of that scale to go waste or sink in, say, Xinjiang? The answer is no. To my mind, there is no difference today in terms of the importance that China will attach to the success of this project in Pakistani space. Yes, of course, Pakistan will develop other ports, and that is not just Pakistan that's doing it. We have seen it across the waters elsewhere also, whether it is Oman, whether it is some other countries, there will be ports that are coming up. We've seen that in Southeast Asia as well. We've seen that in Bangladesh. And the Chinese will be looking out for opportunities as and when they come up. Pakistan, Iran, you are right in saying that there are some differences, but I think at the end of the day, the relationship that will emerge from all this between Pakistan and Iran, especially with China as a benign hovering deity in the background, will be a function of the kind of pressure that Iran faces from the United States. The more Iran is put under pressure, the more likely it is to look at the possibility of cooling and stabilizing its Pakistan flank. It's also very important to evade sanctions, etc. Just as from across the waters also, it was able to evade sanctions by maintaining good relations with certain Gulf countries. So Pakistan is a very important country for Iran, and notwithstanding their sort of sectarian differences, there is great potential for them to work together with the sort of encouragement of China.
I'll combine two questions, Sujan, for you. They're, I think, fairly specific, and you will be able to respond to them, give a very short response, since we've exceeded our time, but nevertheless. One is from Ashish Motreja, who asks about geography, altitude, weather constraints, etc. around the Punjab region. And he says that, is it therefore feasible to have a cost-effective transportation of crude or trade along this highway? That is one question. I think my own quick comment is the Chinese would have done their homework on this before coming in. The second is a question that he asked, and Arfina Hussain also asked the same, about China's blue economy dream and investment in the Gwadar port. Is it a move towards dominating the Indian Ocean region? And how does it affect India and its maritime strategy? So you've touched on these earlier also, but if you can give a very short answer before I'm sort of crucified for extending the time.
Yes, no, I will be brief because I don't want to be crucified by you, Chair. Look, the Punjab route is, again, not to be seen as an economically viable route. It's not, but it's a strategic route. And the value that you can attach to the availability of that route will depend on the situation in which it is put to use insofar as transportation of crude oil is concerned. So it is like a bypass operation that avoids the Malacca dilemma, and it's insurance for the future. I don't see it being used on a commercial basis, but I see its potential. They will keep it running because that's what they're ready to pay as insurance for keeping that route alive. But you won't see, in my view, very large quantities go through that route because it's a no-brainer. Why would one want to do that and pay more? But at times of great turmoil in the region or potential war, etc., that route can be potentially available. I think it's the potential that counts there. China in Gwadar, will it dominate the Indian Ocean? I think domination is a very strong word to use because China's presence, in my view, in the Indian Ocean is coming after a gap of nearly 600 years. And so China is yet to find its feet in the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's okay if we can refer to frequently to Cheng He's voyages and all, but there's nothing to show in the intervening 600 years. So China's presence in the Indian Ocean is relatively new. It is a disruptor, for it comes without the adequate transparency that should be associated with it. We know their capacities. I can see the ships that they can bring into anti-piracy operations, and occasional submarine as well, a hospital ship, the hospital ark, whatever. But I need to know more about their intentions. So from our point of view, of course, we have the 70s in which we resisted any great power presence in the Indian Ocean. Ambassador Nambiar, like me, we served in the first committee at the UN, and we know this ad nauseum. We talked about opposing the IOZOP, etc. But times have changed. Today, India has a more welcoming attitude towards like-minded countries in the Indian Ocean, and that includes the United States, even Japan, etc. So I don't think they can dominate the Indian Ocean, but they will certainly do more. But I do think that if they maintain a military presence in the upper reaches of the Arabian Sea, especially at Pakistan, I wonder if this will not become a factor in any potential hostilities between us and Pakistan. To have, the Chinese disposition there, as in Gilgit, Balochistan, so also in their ports and harbors, that will have to be factored in. So domination over the Indian Ocean, no. A kind of insidious presence, ever expanding, and not necessarily in our interest at all, especially when it comes to island nations. Yes, that is a distinct possibility. It's actually
thanks, Sujan. A final question from Suresh Goyal, Ambassador Suresh Goyal. You raised a very pertinent point, I think, about Chinese presence in Gwadar, Karachi, etc. I think it's not something that, it's something that is likely to happen. And if I look at a bleak future, then it is likely to happen fairly soon. But may I request Suresh to ask his question, and then we'll close up.
Thank you very much, Jadev. Very briefly, really speaking, I think we all now understand that the CPEC has its own geostrategic and economic, but mostly geostrategic challenges for India, considering that it does bring into its ambit several countries in the region into a very close economic embrace with China. And China's presence, even though Sujana just have said that it is not really that much of a threat to our own strategic interest in Indian Ocean, as history has quoted history and everything. My question really is that if we take CPEC as a geostrategic challenge to India, both in the Pacific as well as, but mostly in the Indian Ocean now, that expands Indian challenges from Pacific to the Indian Ocean now from China. And in that case, what are the options which India can exercise? One you have already quoted in your presentation, Sujan, when you spoke about really developing those connectivity projects with the countries and let them intersect with the BRI if they have to. But beyond the economic project.
Suresh, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. I didn't say they must intersect. I'm saying we will have to think about all this.
Correct. But my question really is, we think of Quad as a strategy in the Pacific, in the Pacific. Can somehow that kind of a Quad or Quad itself be used to counter the Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean? Chinese strategic presence in the Indian Ocean, so to say. Thank you.
So again, very briefly, if I have to focus on the Quad and the maritime aspect and try to do that in the presence of very senior admirals who have a lot of experience, I can see Vice Admiral Muralidharan, I can see Admiral Shekhar Sinha, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha. So they know a lot about this, but let me just tell you how I see it. Firstly, in the Quad, basically to dissect it a little bit, a bit of, sort of hair splitting here, that of the four, three have a maritime posture. One has a maritime come continental terrestrial posture. So that one is India. The three do not have any, continental grating against this rising power. The one that has maritime and continental posture, that's India, has a direct grating on the continental side and also has issues with regard to China's presence in the Western and Eastern Indian Oceans. So now the key point over here is that what does India do? India has a certain limited amount of resources. The Navy is being expanded. It's not being ignored. But at the end of the day, we have to cut our coat according to our cloth. And I believe, these are my personal views, that we have to focus more on the Western and Eastern Indian Oceans. We thereafter can look at securing our interests in collaboration with other countries, including the likes of Indonesia, etc., to carry out certain amount of joint patrols, etc., if they cooperate fully, across the Malacca also, to secure our interests there, and in the South China Sea. But pitching ourselves all the way into the Pacific will have to be done with a certain amount of moderation. And of course, we are part of the exercises in the Pacific also now. We have friendly port visits in the middle of the Pacific also. While I was in Japan, I arranged for our naval vessels to visit the Republic of Marshall Islands all the way to Majuro for the first time, in history. So all this is good, but I think the focus of the Quad will have to be for us the immediate oceanic space in which we can actually play a much bigger role, and that will also ensure that we get the right kind of mileage out of this format.
Before I hand over to Dr. Rija Nair for closing up, let me just say that let me add to what you said by saying that the attitude of Japan and Australia towards China in the event of a confrontation is, I think, very pertinent. So far, they have both been hedging. So as and when it comes to such a crisis situation, what will they do is one question. Finally, let me thank you very much, Sujan, for a very, I think, enlightening and a very exhaustive presentation. If this was a live gathering, I'm sure you would have got a standing ovation, but nevertheless, thanks a lot. And I'll hand over to Ashok, who's already glowering, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sujan. Thank you, Jaydev. It has been a wonderful session. Thank you very much.
I thank you all very much. Thank you for inviting me.